Mark was talking about how broadband is evolving in South Dakota. I know our next speaker was smiling because everything that he works on is all about connectivity. High-speed connectivity is the key to the Internet of Things, connected cars, smart cities, smart homes, and all that really cool stuff. We told you earlier today that we were coming back to the showcase to talk more about what's going on in the here and now in South Dakota. And I think we've had a great program thus far to talk about things that are already here in the state. But we wanted to end the program with a little bit more of a futuristic look about what could be in South Dakota in the future, in the near future, in the far future, just to give you a little taste of what's to come. And we thought we would discuss doing that around the concept of the Internet of Things as well as smart cities. There's some really amazing things going on with that. So with that, I'm going to introduce AT&T's lead for Smart Cities program, Evan Culbertson, and he also will be joined, after a brief presentation, he'll be joined by a familiar voice in the Sioux Falls media, Jodi Schwan. So Evan and Jodi.
Hello, thanks for having me. It's good to be here. Excited to talk to you about the Internet of Things and smart cities. So, quick overview of what we're going to talk about today. We're going to lead off with an overview of IoT, Internet of Things, what it really means. You've probably all heard about it, but I have a good overview that I like to explain, why it exists, why we're connecting devices, and just a good explanation of what the Internet of Things really is. Overview of smart cities and how IoT plays into that. What's going on today in the US, what is possible in the future, and then we're going to go in and talk about 5G a little bit and what impact that can have for IoT and smart cities. So, when I started thinking about what I wanted to talk about today and how I wanted to present these materials, I decided I wanted to lead off with this kind of overview of the Internet of Things and what it really means. When people ask me what I do now, I'm a product manager focused on the Internet of Things for AT&T, and typically I get the question, well, what does that mean? What is the Internet of Things? And typically my response is, well, it's basically connecting everything to the Internet. Anything that you can think of that could have a connection to the Internet, that's really what we do. But that doesn't really explain why we're connecting to things to the Internet, and I didn't really have a good explanation on that. I mean, everything's very specific to the use case. There are specific needs for each product, why you will connect it to the Internet, but from an overarching general perspective, I didn't really have a good explanation. So I was lucky that I came across this article recently. It was in Harvard Business Review, and it was written by James Heppelman and Michael Porter. And it does a really good job explaining the benefits of connecting products to the Internet. So let's start off at the bottom here, and we will use a car as an example. So when the car was first conceived, when it was first manufactured, nobody ever really thought that they were going to connect it to the Internet. It was built to convey people from one place to another. It's used to deliver packages, deliver goods. But that was never really a consideration. That's not why it was built. It was not built to be connected to the Internet. So once you connect these devices to the Internet, there's 4 levels of functionality that you can really get. And it is kind of the purpose of why these are connected. So the first level is you can monitor. So for cars, for example, you can monitor location with GPS data. You can monitor driving habits, so you can see if a driver is, what speed they're driving at, how quickly they're braking. You can monitor maintenance. When was the last time each of the cars in a fleet was in the shop? When was the oil last checked? So these are all data points that you can monitor on a car. So once you can monitor the data that's coming off of a device or a product, the next step is you can add some control into that based on what the data is that's coming off of it. So let's take it back to the car for a second here, and it's now that you have information on how fast the car is going, you can send an alert to the driver when they are going over the speed limit. You can incentivize good driving behavior by monitoring, are they braking too quickly? Are they accelerating too quickly? You can also You can put geofencing in, where you can say, this device or this car can only operate in this particular geographical region. So again, that's that next level, is control. Once you can control, then you can start optimizing. So now that you have all this data coming off the car and you can actually control things using that data, you can optimize the tasks that it's performing. So going back to cars, a great example there is route optimization. So you can look at across your entire fleet of cars, and you can say, these are the most effective routes to go on based on all the data that we have. And the optimization and what you're trying to accomplish is different for your different needs. You could be prioritizing customer satisfaction to make sure that your cars get to your customers as fast as possible. You could be focused on lowering costs, so making sure that they're going on the routes that will use the least amount of gasoline. You could be focused on maintenance, trying to take them on routes that have the least amount of potholes. So again, that's that third level. And then the final level, once you have these other three, is automation. So in the case of the car, it is removing the driver entirely and using all that data, those controls and the optimization, creating those pre-planned routes and allowing the car to operate autonomously using the kind of the framework that you've created, but then on top of that, adding in things like machine learning and artificial intelligence. But what's really exciting about the Internet of Things is not just individual devices and connecting into the Internet, but it's when you connect millions and billions of these to the Internet and having them all share the data that they're collecting to improve the optimization and automation. So there's a lot of these devices out there. This is an estimate from GSMA. It is a mobile industry group that it's an industry group. And as of 2017, they estimated there were 7.5 billion IoT devices this is globally. That's expected to grow to 25.1 billion in 2025. So that's a large amount of devices that are going to be out there. And they see what's driving this is three main factors. And this is based on the GSMA and how they're building their forecast. First of all is the supportive ecosystem of startups and investors. There are a lot of really smart people that are focused in this space right now, and a lot of money that is helping them come up with new devices, new use cases, and they're being created every day, every year. They're coming up with new things. And on top of that, there are particular industries that are most exciting and are expected to have the fastest growth in the coming years. And those are really centered around smart buildings, smart homes, smart utilities. So things like water meters, electric meters, there's a lot of those around the world. Smart manufacturing, so connecting manufacturing plants, and then smart cities as well will be a main driver of this growth. And then the last major factor that GSMA calls out is telecom providers around the world are coming out with new cellular technology that's really focused around the Internet of Things and addressing the needs of Internet of Things devices and Internet of Things use cases. And one example of that is what's known as LTE-M. This is an example of a low-power wide area network. That is LPWAN, is what that stands for, or is the acronym. And this is one of two examples that I'm familiar with. The other is NB-IoT, narrowband IoT. So if you hear of either of those, they're mentioned a lot in the news these days. They're examples of these LPWAN networks. And what these are is they are examples of networks that have been created, again, with IoT in mind, because IoT devices have different needs than a typical cell phone or other mobile devices that you might use. One particular benefit is lower device costs. So the device, a big component of that is the hardware that actually connects the product to the internet. Those are significantly lower on these types of networks. And what that does is that increases the amount of use cases that are economically viable, because if you have a less expensive entry point and development that needs to go into producing a particular device, you can use it in many more cases and not need to have a higher return because of the fact that your initial investment is lower. Longer battery life. Now, this is really important for smart cities because a lot of our solutions need to be installed, and you don't want to have to go out and replace a battery every year, every 2 years. That's very expensive to do. So one of the benefits of these low-power wide area networks are longer battery lives. And again, we're not sure where that's going to be because this is relatively new technology, but the expectation is that for some use cases, you can see battery life up to 10 years, which is very important for smart cities. On top of that, another big benefit for smart cities is better coverage for devices underground and in buildings. So this is beneficial for smart buildings where you have a device that could be in a basement, or smart cities where you have a device that might be underground monitoring a water main or in the subway. So that's another big benefit here. Module size is also much smaller. So again, that increases your number of use cases. And then the other benefit is that all of this is on licensed spectrum. So a lot of smart city solutions today are on unlicensed spectrum, and licensed spectrum is what the cellular providers can provide, and that has added security benefits as well as unlicensed spectrum can have issues with interference. Now that we talked about IoT and the networks that support it, let's talk a little bit about what a smart city is. So a smart city is more than just a bunch of individual devices that are performing the tasks that that a city needs to have performed. So a good example up here, you've got utilities. So smart electric meters that can report usage statistics much more frequently than you could do a decade ago. Or another good example would be smart vehicles. Again, we talked about the car, and you can get all of the information about a fleet of whatever cars your city has that you're maintaining. You can collect all the data and, again, optimize, like we talked about, those particular solutions. But when it gets really exciting is when you are bringing all that data together from across the city, from across all the devices that are owned by the city, taking that data and improving the way that all of those individual devices perform. And then the other thing that the data can actually be used for, if and when it starts being collected, is can be used to inform your city leadership on making more real-time and data-based decisions. And again, that all starts with the collection of the data, which happens at the devices themselves. So instead of just talking about it, though, we do have a quick video here that gives a little better picture of what's possible.
With the Internet of Things, cities are becoming smarter, engaging citizens, and reinventing themselves. Connecting everything from Wi-Fi hotspots to mass transit to emergency alerts. City planners are creating better and safer places for people to live and work. By integrating technology and driving innovation, AT&T is helping city officials reduce operational costs, increase sustainability, and plan for long-term growth. Now with smart lighting, a lamppost equipped with sensors and connectivity can remotely monitor for everything from air quality to public safety. In transportation, smart programs can alert drivers in real time about traffic delays, synchronize lights for emergency vehicles, and suggest alternative routes to keep traffic running smoothly. In communities with aging infrastructure, maintaining water pipes is critical. So now with acoustic sensors, cities can easily detect exact locations of water leaks, making repairs more cost-effective. A leader in smart city innovations, AT&T has the experience of managing large, complex city projects. Combined with real-time analytics, a strong ecosystem, and a global network, we are bringing the power of the Internet of Things to make cities smarter.
Hopefully that helped, kind of paint the picture a little more, better than me just talking about it. Hopefully that helps. So talked about it a little bit in the video there, but wanted to dive into what's really driving cities to implement smart city solutions today. And there's a lot of research out there. A lot of companies, they interview public leaders, and we also talk to customers a lot. And a few kind of key areas keep on coming up. So these are the 5 that we really focus on the most and that we hear the most. And the first one at the top is always economic development. And this is all around, how do you bring in, how do we as a city bring in new companies and a talented workforce to work for those companies to drive economic growth? The next on the list, typically, and again, it depends on the city. Every city has different needs. Public safety, aging infrastructure, and increased urbanization, especially around housing availability in a lot of the bigger cities in the United States. But what's interesting about these other three is that they actually play into economic development a fair amount, right? You cannot, it's tough to attract a workforce if you have issues with public safety, and it's tough to attract new companies if you have a crumbling infrastructure. And then the last that is starting to gain more traction, you hear it more often, is environmental sustainability. I always reference the Global Covenant of Mayors, which is a group of mayors from around the world that have come together and have basically said, we don't really care what happens at the federal level. As cities, we're going to take the lead. And it was really around the Paris Climate Accord, and we are going to do what we need to do to meet our sustainability goals. And even though there are these really important drivers and plenty of solutions out there that can help with those issues today, there are some pretty key roadblocks that cities face. The first one, and it's probably no surprise to anyone here, is budgets. You hear it all the time. How are we going to pay for this? And that all ties into, as well, explaining the value proposition of the individual solutions and what are we really going to get back if we become a smart city and start implementing some of these. And I think that a good way, there's two good ways to get around this. First of all is to start small. Start with a pilot and test out solutions that are really focusing in on the issues that are particularly important to your city, to your constituent. And then based on those results, make them public, make sure that everyone is aware of the benefits of, that a larger rollout will have, and that can make explaining the value proposition a little easier. The second is to explore alternative financing models. A good example is a public-private partnership, which can take on a lot of different meetings, and you'll probably hear it talked about a lot. And it really just is partnering with the private industry to create win-win situations where both parties benefit. And at the same time, you can implement some of these solutions. Another key issue that's very specific to working with cities is cross-department coordination. So when we talk about making a smart city and connecting everything, all of those assets do not exist within one department. You're not going to be talking about one budget. You're going to be talking about budgets across departments. You're going to be talking about data that's going across departments. You're going to be talking about committees that sit in different departments. So that is a very big issue, and whoever in a city that is in charge of managing a smart city rollout needs to keep that one in mind and be very good at managing the different departments and understanding this challenge. The next is data management. So we've talked about how all of these different devices will be collecting and sending data, and then you analyze that data to make better decisions and to improve the functionality of each of the devices that's connected. There's a lot of data coming in. And this is a really important issue. You have to be prepared to understand just how important it is to manage that data, how much data there is going to be, and also making sure that data is secure. And then the last, and this is the issue with any IoT device, is cybersecurity and privacy concerns. And we'll talk about security just a little more, but you'll hear this all the time. So we're talking about IoT security, and this is the only time I'm really going to, in this presentation, push AT&T. I know AT&T was mentioned a little bit in the video, but I will say that this is one of the benefits of working with a company like AT&T for connecting devices and using that secured spectrum as opposed to the unsecured spectrum. So AT&T takes a 4-layer approach to IoT security. First is at the device layer. So each device that's certified on our network for IoT has to meet certain security standards, and that makes sure that the device itself is secure. The next is security at the network layer. So we have, it is our network, and we make sure that our network is secure, and we have protocols in place to make sure that our network and the data traveling across it is secure. Then there's the data and applications layer. So any application that's running within our network or on any of these devices also has to be secure, and there are protocols in place there as well. And then on top of that, across this entire ecosystem, there is threat management, where we are constantly detecting and managing threats that are coming in into this ecosystem. So despite these roadblocks, we have been seeing some progress. I think that it's probably not as fast as some people in the industry might have hoped, but we are seeing some pretty big rollouts. And on top of these are just a few examples. There's way more than this, and I just wanted to call out a few big ones. But there's a lot more of the smaller pilots that are happening, like I said, where they're trying out new programs, and every city, again, is looking at something slightly different based on their needs. So I'll just talk about a few of these really quickly. So San Jose, leak detection nodes, really cool technology. Here you have nodes that sit on the water distribution system, and they listen for leaks. They use acoustic sensors to listen to the water flowing through the pipes to precisely identify where a leak is, so that when it comes time to, every city is going through replacement of their water infrastructure. And so instead of just guessing based on the age of the pipe, you can actually try to identify precisely where the leak is and replace that before a massive leak actually occurs. Another good example is Los Angeles with smart streetlights. Washington, D.C., they installed a lot of smart water meters. So this is another good example of, we talked about smart electric meters a little while ago, smart water meters. This is a technology that has changed a lot in recent years. With these smart water meters, I believe you can check usage, I think it's almost every 15 minutes, as opposed to old methods where they were checking it once a month, and you had someone drive, walk up to the house, look at the meter, record it. So that obviously led to a lot of misreadings. So this is a really cool technology. And then in New York City, they installed 10,000 smart kiosks, but they're called communication structures. But they're all around New York City. If you ever go, you'll see them. They provide public Wi-Fi, and they also have information about the city and advertising and stuff like that. And so these are just a few examples. But like I said, there's a lot more going on, and a lot of things are in early stages where cities are really just testing things out and trying to understand what's right for them. So moving on to 5G. I was actually expecting 5G to be talked about a little more earlier on in the day, but I guess this is really the first time it's being talked about. So who here is familiar with 5G, heard of 5G? I am shocked to see how much this is in the news these days. It's talked about in so many different contexts. Now I'm going to focus in on the benefits that are really particular to IoT smart cities, but these are the 5 up here on the screen, the 5 key benefits that you'll hear the most. So let's start with massive device connectivity. Obviously, you can probably imagine why this is important for smart cities, where if we're talking about connecting everything in a city, you're not just going to have the connected cars, connected devices. You've also got all of the human beings that have their cell phones. So it's very important for smart cities, this massive connectivity. So that's very exciting. The next is ultra low latency. So there's a difference between speed and latency, not necessarily something I've learned recently. Latency is all about getting from, how quickly can you get from point A to point B? How quickly can a command that happens over here at a device, or a piece of data that's collected over here, travel back to the cloud to have some computation or some analysis run on it? Ultra high speeds, on the other hand, are more about how much can actually be consumed, how much volume can be consumed, and at what rate. Okay, sorry about that. And so for smart cities, ultra low latency is very exciting, because a lot of what we do is we collect data and then we analyze that data. Sometimes that analysis actually has to go back to the device, where an actual, we go back to that control concept. So if you're collecting a data point, you send that back to the cloud to get analyzed, and then sending that back to the device, that takes time. So if you can lower that amount of time, which is what one of the benefits of 5G, that's incredibly beneficial for a lot of use cases. So on top of that, like I said, those are the two main ones for IoT and smart cities, but these other ones are great for other applications that a lot of you will probably hopefully experience in the coming years once this becomes more ubiquitous. But ultra-high speeds, they're talking about multi-gigabit speeds is the term that is the approved term I'm allowed to use. Better capacity and very reliable. So I'm going to talk about a little bit about use cases to just kind of give you a sense of what's possible, but I wanted to start with this. There was an article 2 weeks ago in the Wall Street Journal, I don't know if anyone saw it, it was focused on winning the 5G race, not from a company-by-company perspective, but more from a state-by-state, city-by-city, country-by-country, what the benefits of really leading in 5G are. And this is from a former FCC commissioner, Rob McDowell, quote from the article, not from Rob himself. What's exciting about 5G is that nobody can really fathom what's going to happen. And I think that's really important, because I will show you 3 use cases that I find to be really cool that I've been hearing about lately, and I had no idea they were even being considered until I started hearing them. And now you hear about them in the news as well, so it's not really that big of a surprise anymore, but they are very exciting. But what really is exciting about 5G is once you get the network up and running, you get these higher speeds, you get these lower latencies, you get the devices in the hands of innovators, entrepreneurs, who can then create solutions that we would have never imagined before. That's when you really start to see the benefit. And that's what's exciting, and that's really the focus of the article. And then it's also about, you don't want to be, the last country going into 5G, because you could lose that edge to other countries and not be in the lead when it comes to development of the applications and the software that can run on 5G. So with that being said, I'll talk about 3 of the use cases that I find to be really cool. First is V2X. So this is vehicle to anything communication. Whenever you see X, it's being used more and more. I've seen it basically means that there are multiple things that are going to be falling into that category. So vehicle to anything, there's vehicle to vehicle communication, so vehicles talking to each other, exchanging information about where they're going to optimize the routes of both of them. Vehicle to infrastructure, so a good example here is talking to the traffic system and getting feedback from that. Talking to the infrastructure, there is a potential to have equipment in cities that help guide cars through the cities. There is maps that need to be shared. So lots of communication that needs to happen from the vehicle. And the thought is that 5G with massive device connectivity will help enable this. On top of that, the low latency is very important as well, because the data coming off of the car, you can compute it within the car itself, but it's also beneficial to have that computational power within the network at low latency to help bring this to life. And keep in mind that this is not just about cars. This is anything that needs to navigate a city autonomously. Another good example that's coming out now where there's some trials running are service robots. So robots that can navigate a city and deliver packages to people autonomously. Another good example, one that I'm particularly interested in, is drones. So having drones that can automatically fly to, if there's a gunshot, you can have a drone fly to that site and try to capture who fired the shot. So a lot of exciting things here. Moving on, video analytics. So video data is very complex, very big files, lots of data. And really, and especially if you start having in bigger cities, a lot of cameras where you have a team that's back trying to monitor all of this and make sense of all of it, it starts to become a little impossible to manage. So instead of having a big wall with every monitor that's spread out from every camera across a city, you can have analytics that are actually working on each video stream to do certain tasks. So a good example of that could be facial recognition if there is a police chase and they're looking for a suspect, and instead of sending all of the data back, you can actually calculate that closer to the camera itself to help track that situation. And then the last one I want to talk about is augmented and virtual reality. So these are definitely buzzwords today. I don't know how familiar everyone is here with augmented and virtual reality and the difference between the two, so I'll just start kind of from the beginning here. So the way I like to think about it is you have kind of two goal lines. You have augmented reality over here, virtual reality over here. Augmented reality is, you have a plane of vision, whether that's, you could be just you looking ahead of you right now. It could be you have an AR headset on where, it's your plane of vision and it's overlaying images, graphics, information on top of your live feed. So that's this side. And then there's VR over here, which is really completely immersive virtual experience where you have a headset on and you are just completely consumed in that environment. And this is another example of where X is coming into play. I recently heard XR to define this area. So there is a spectrum between augmented and virtual. And so that's the X. And there's different levels when you go from kind of straight AR all the way to VR. So again, this is another great example of, this is very computationally intensive. Another great benefit of 5G from the massive device connectivity, but also from the latency improvements. So how does this tie into smart cities, I think is really the big question. I didn't necessarily see this at first, but I think a good example is, and might not be one that reduces costs or, and it really tackles any particular challenge, but it is a cool idea, a virtual tour. You could have tourists that have a pre-planned route or information at different waypoints across your city, and they could have AR goggles on and they can walk through and get a virtual tour of the city and learn very interesting facts. And you could have a pizza shop that has a promo for tourists as long as they're going through this AR tour. So I think that that's just a cool example, but again, this is one of those ones where I think we're going to see a lot of innovation once these devices are readily available, once the networks are up and running. This is going to be one where you're going to see a lot of really cool innovation. So I think that takes me to the end, and we're going to do a little Q&A.
That's right. Thank you, Evan. As Cheryl said, I'm Jodi Schwan. I'm the owner and publisher of SiouxFalls.Business. I'm also probably now a lifelong government geek because I worked in city government as chief of staff for the city of Sioux Falls from 2006 to 2010. So, Evan, I was very interested in what you had to share and where the future is going. Thank you and welcome. And now we'll talk a little bit more about this area, our region, and how Evan's topics could apply here. I liked the map. I liked seeing what was happening all around the country. For a little context for you, Sioux Falls metro area is about 250,000 people. So I'm curious what you're starting to see in areas of that population size.
So it depends. Depends on density. It's not just necessarily that 250,000 is the same as it is in another city that might be a denser 250,000. I think that it really depends on what the particular needs of each city are, and that's really where you have to start is, define your needs. Where can, what do your citizens care about the most, and then try to develop a smart city program around that. So I think that anywhere you could probably benefit from some form of traffic optimization, connected security cameras probably can help for crime. But connected water meters, electric meters, in terms of collecting more accurate readings, that can be applied pretty much anywhere.
Sioux Falls got on board early, I know, with sensors related to ice and snow, which would be a big issue. Fortunately, not quite yet for us, but do you have some best practices for the winter weather management that are emerging yet?
I don't know. I mean, I think that there's one is the connecting a fleet of snow plows, right? There's benefits that can be made there to optimize the routes. But I think that's really the main one that I've heard when it comes to snow management is connecting that fleet of snow plows.
What about some of the rural areas? What are some easier entry points into the smart cities arena for them, keeping in mind that the budgets just usually get more limited the smaller you get?
It's a great question, and I think that as you move away from really congested cities where you have a lot of people in a very small amount of area, the opportunity definitely is less, but it doesn't mean that it goes away. Again, it all starts with that initial laying out, what are the needs of your particular city, and then building out those, the value proposition, the use cases, starting small, trying a pilot, and then really kind of rolling that out. I mean, I come from a small town, 20,000 people, but it was a dense town, right? And so our downtown, we had plenty of issues with traffic. We had, relatively busy shop fronts, and so there are solutions that can monitor foot traffic to determine what the best place is to put up a store. I remember there was this one corner where it was notorious, this one spot, nobody could stay in business there for more than 3 or 4 months, and I think it was because of the lack of parking. And so that type of stuff, there are solutions that can help businesses better understand what the best places are to set up shop.
Where do you start? I mean, it's such a broad topic. Obviously, you can go a lot of different directions. City of Sioux Falls alone is 12 really diverse departments, that work on lots of different services and different programmatic areas. Do you have any guidance there?
Absolutely. So I think that best place to start, like I said, is to start by defining all of your, what are your top needs? What are your top goals as a city? What do your citizens care about? What are your biggest problems? What are your biggest issues? And then is really and I think it's actually already happened, that you assign a person to really take the lead, right? A champion for the Smart Cities initiatives. They will be the person that takes those needs, then matches that up to solutions in the industry, works with the private industry to better understand what solutions are out there to address the needs. They will be the ones that are attending conferences, because this is a constantly evolving ecosystem where new solutions are coming out every year, and you really need someone to be devoted to that to understand what the new technology is. They can put together that initial pilot, monitor the outcomes of that over a 1, maybe 2-year period, take the results of that. I think making them public is probably a good route, because that allows your citizens to understand what's going on, what the benefits are, and you see a lot of that happening today, where cities are making that data public on an anonymized basis, right, an aggregate basis, to see what the results were, so that when it comes time to repitch a broader rollout, the value proposition is pretty straightforward. It is, we have these results, here's what you need to do. And then the last thing I'll say is make sure that you are set up to handle the data. And we talked about that a little bit.
Is this something cities are doing in-house, or are they bringing in outside resources to do that?
So for which part? The data
Managing
part?
the data?
I think that it depends. You have CIOs, so Chief Information Officers, in some cities where they already have a lot of data that they're collecting. I don't know how prevalent that role is necessarily, and whether it's in every city. I mean, I think that most cities are collecting data in some form or fashion and storing it. So, but it's probably a good thing to make sure there is a person that is, comfortable with data management, with understanding the needs and how to make sure it's secure, how to make sure you can access it. But I think there are companies that can definitely help with that if that's not something that you have in-house.
And then with analyzing it too, I would think. Right? What does it all mean?
Well, absolutely. No, I think so. And that's something where there are a lot of companies that are working on kind of that concept. And so you have single point solutions that are solving one particular problem, and they have their own analytics built into that. But then there's also opportunities to have cross analytics across products. And that can be done, in-house if there's capabilities to do that, or you can work with a company that, that is an analytics company that can help you, again, aggregate the data, but also analyze the data and determine, what you can actually do with it.
Obviously you mentioned this, there's some upfront investment with a lot of this, and for elected officials who need to be accountable for those dollars, I know they love to tell a good story about improving service, but certainly achieving some ROI is critical. Are there some smart city applications that seem to have particularly good ROI?
Well, it really depends on the city. So there are 3 key areas that smart city solutions, I don't know if maybe it applies to all of IoT, but smart city solutions really benefited. You look at cost savings, revenue, an increase in revenue for some, and then also sustainability are kind of the 3 areas that I've heard of people really focus on. So from a cost savings perspective, if you look at, let's save water. So water in some cities is very inexpensive. In other cities, it's significantly more expensive. So there are certain cities that, a water savings initiative will have some really important cost benefits. So if you look at smart water meters, that's a great way to better understand how much water is actually being lost in your system, and then you can start better tracking the results of specific initiatives to limit those losses. If you talk about electricity, again, electricity prices vary across the country. And so in some cities, that might be a great cost savings benefit, from smart streetlights could be a very easy win, but if the cost of electricity is very low, that might not be the case. So it really depends on each city.
You mentioned the need for public-private partnerships in implementing some of these. Do you have any case studies out there, any best practices of how public and private entities have come together to make this happen?
Yes. I think a good example, I feel like I keep fading in and out here. A good example is anything where there can be shared revenue. So I talked a little bit about the kiosk idea, and if you have advertising on the kiosk, you could share some of the revenue between the city and the whatever company you partner with to offset some of those upfront costs. And I think that there are also opportunities around shared savings models where instead of paying for an entire initiative up front, you can only pay for the benefits that you accrue via cost savings from, whether it's electricity or water or something like that. There's potential for that as well.
I'm curious, obviously there's bureaucracy involved at every level of government. Typically there's less of it in local government, but when you look at rolling out smart applications, in this case I'll just call it, are the states at the table yet? Is the federal government talking about this? Or is it really concentrated at a local level at this point?
I think that there's different departments at the state level. We talk to departments of transportation. They have key initiatives that they work on. You talk to, instead of just a city, which has all their departments kind of locally aggregated. I haven't really seen a smart state approach yet. Federal government, that's a different beast, I think, entirely. And I personally don't do much with that space.
Anything that you would say is probably the most prevalent? I mean, when you look at what smart applications are really taking off, is there something that cities seem to be using more frequently, something that's trending up?
Yeah, I think we've seen a lot of smart streetlights. I think that's been pretty popular. It's a pretty good entry point, pretty easy value proposition to explain, pretty easy technology, right? You're using less electricity by installing LED lights, which consume less energy, but then on top of that, these things are able to turn on and turn off when they're needed. So that's a pretty easy one to explain. So I think that's probably the most common that I've seen.
And I want to have you elaborate just a little bit on 5G, because you're right, I feel like I'm hearing this in the news all of the time. Does that mean we're getting close? What's your sense of when 5G might actually go from this conversation to more of a reality?
Yeah, so I think that's really going to be, again, city by city dependent. I think that AT&T has announced a number of cities that they're building out their 5G network this year and then some more next year. And I think that those decisions are made at the city level and until you build out to a national level. I don't know exactly. I don't know if we've necessarily released what our roadmap looks like nationally. So I can't really speak to that. But I did see an estimate from GSMA, which was the body that I quoted for the devices, and their estimate is by 2025 there will be about 14% of the mobile devices will be 5G. So it's not going to be all of a sudden everybody switches to 5G. Networks have to be built out, devices have to be built, and then customers have to actually start switching and seeing the benefit and then switching. So it takes time to really roll that out.
So if I'm a city that wants to be a leader in 5G, what do I need to do? How do I need to be positioning myself? What's the message to leadership? Is there anything they can do?
I mean, I think the first step is to work with companies like AT&T to build out that network and get it ready, and because that takes time. And there are cities that have been announced, and I don't know what the status of that is here necessarily, but a number of cities have been announced already, and just kind of trying to move that along as fast as possible, I think.
As far as the smart technology goes, how important is it going to be for the devices that are being implemented in communities to be 5G compatible? I would think the last thing you want to be is the city that invests in all this technology and then all of a sudden it's not. maybe as effective as it needs to be, and you have to go back and upgrade and change things.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that 5G is beneficial for certain use cases, more beneficial for some than others. I think that when you looked at the IoT-specific networks for some of the solutions where incredibly low data rates, so again, I'll go back to the water meter as an example. It's waking up every 15 minutes maybe, or some solutions wake up every day to report one data point. That doesn't really benefit from that, but there's a lot of use cases that really do, and so it is use case specific, and it's all about enabling those use cases that really can't exist without 5G.
I'm going to have you rewind for this final one. When you talked about the reasons why cities should consider smart technology, the first one on there was economic development. For us, that's huge, particularly workforce development, as we try to bring in and retain more people. How does one connect to the other? How does being a smart city lead to increased workforce development?
It's a good question. I think that, smart cities aren't just devices. They're also, it's talking about, how do you become more technologically savvy? So how that part of that is probably, building websites that help to promote your city from a national perspective. I mean, that's not necessarily IoT, but it's part of that whole smart city initiative. And I think that building out better infrastructure to support companies to come to your city, I think can help. I think interactive experiences like the kiosks that can help attract more people to downtown areas. I think that things that help with public safety, so make your city safer for all your citizens, that can help attract people, keep people, and keep businesses coming. I think that
I would think it's a mindset too, to a certain extent, that you're going to be progressive.
Yeah, I think that is a very good point. I didn't even think about that, but you're probably right. Yeah, I think that does play a factor into it.
Any final thoughts before we wrap up? Anything that I should have asked that I didn't? This is my go-to final question in the interview, because sometimes you get the best answer. So, any question I missed?
No, I don't think so. I think hopefully it was helpful for everyone in the audience. I mean, I don't know. I think I got everything out that I wanted to be honest.
Well, we've been glad to have you here. Thanks for all the knowledge that you shared and for helping us wrap up the program.
All right.
Please help me thank Evan for his time today. Thank you. And with that, I will turn it back over to Cheryl. Where is she here? Thanks, Evan.
So is that my walk-up song? I haven't figured out what mine was yet. We're going to have to talk about this for next year because I've got some in mind. Okay, thanks. Well, thank you, Evan. Thank you, Jodi, so much. It was so informative, and I think it was a good way to glimpse to the future, so it's a great way to end the program. I think this was a great opportunity for us to sit back and hear about what's going on in our state, what could happen in our state. And you notice I get to say our state now. Tom always puts my remarks together, and he used to always say our, and I felt kind of like, I shouldn't say our state when I don't live here, but now I do, so I can say our state. So I'm very proud to be in this state and to be part of all the amazing things going on. I appreciate all of you spending your morning with us. I appreciate all the speakers coming and just providing such great information. And without you speakers, this really wouldn't be anything at all. So thank you for taking so much time to put your presentations together and for being with us. And we really look forward to, Vernon, where are you? 4th annual next year. So thank you all very much, and have a great rest of your day. Thanks.